Have you ever wanted to draw a schematic for your knitting pattern or someone else's knitting pattern? In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw a schematic for a knitting pattern in Inkscape. We're going to be drawing a schematic for a mitten pattern that I once designed, and I actually have up on Ravelry. This is a mitten that I designed and I've drawn the schematic for already. I'm just going to redraw it as an example to you today. I've created the schematic proportionally, so it is to scale of my actual knitting pattern finished measurements, and I am hoping to show you everything from preparing your document in Inkscape to drawing the outline of the knitting pattern schematic you're drawing, to adding the finished measurements, the little details and things that Inkscape has to offer for you in there, and exporting it and inserting it into your document or your future knitting pattern. So without further ado, let's get into this tutorial. First, we're going to prepare our document, and we're going to do this by going up to where it says File and clicking where it says Document Properties. And that is where I pick the size of my document. I like to do US letter, and I also am going to set a rectangular grid and set that up. I like to put the origin, the spacing Y and spacing X at 0.25. I like to set the grid units at inches and the major grid lines every 4. So if you're interested in learning more about these, I'll link a video that I did more on specifics of setting up your grid. Now I'm going to go save it. So I went back up to File, click Save, and I'm going to name this file. Obviously, you can name it whatever you need to refer to it later, and then click Save. And now we've prepared our document. We're ready to start drawing. Today we are drawing a mitten schematic, actually for my something mittens pattern. And to start, we're going to click the Bezier tool on the side. I already know the points on this grid where I want to start to make a proportional schematic, and you will have to figure that out if you want a proportional schematic for whatever knitting pattern you're drawing a schematic for. I am just starting off by drawing the cuff, so I'm using the Bezier tool to do that and creating lines, and ultimately going to be creating an object which is going to be my cuff for this schematic. The Bezier tool is the most used tool probably that I use for the drawing, the actual outline of the schematic. And you'll see how much we use it as we continue on. So there's our first object, and it's the cuff of our mitten. Now we are beginning to draw the hand of our mitten. It's really important when you use your Bezier tool and use wherever you begin your hand and it connects to the cuff to make sure those points are touching, or else on your finished schematic you are going to have you're just gonna have not matching lines, and that is not going to look nice. You're going to have a gap in your drawing. So it's very important to make sure that those points where you start drawing your hand and where you finished your cuff are matching. And I come up the length of my mitten that I want on the drawing, and I am going to click a point on the grid, and then I'm going to go up to my final mitten length. So this is the area where I'm going to begin decreasing. So I've drawn a straight line up to where the decreasing on the mitten is going to begin, and then I move to the center of the mitten, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So this is going to allow me to create that decreasing shape and really give an accurate representation of what's happening in the finished knit on the schematic drawing. So I'm moving slow on this drawing is because I'm looking at my measurements to make sure I hit the correct points, and not have to redraw it for y'all. I'm definitely getting used to editing videos, filming videos while drawing schematics and this whole process. So you can see now we have the hand, we have the straight lines going up to the top, we have this triangle shape at the top where the decreasing happens, but obviously that doesn't look out a lot at all like a curved mitten with the decreasing would look like. So I'm going to go up where it says Edit Pass by Nodes on the left side of the screen, and this is the tool that I'm going to use to create that shape that's really going to happen on the actual mitten when you're following the pattern, is this smooth curved shape that the decreasing create. So you do that by grabbing onto that line and you just drag that out to create your curve and your more accurate decreasing shape. I also use these, you can see these little, and I do not know what they are called, but these, they almost look like balloons. They have like a stick and a little circle on the end. You can use those to shape this curve, and I use them to make sure that they both match on each side so that I have a symmetrical drawing that is very, it's symmetrical. It's not going to be wonky and a different curve on one side than the other. So I'm still playing around with those till they look symmetrical and smooth and have that mitten shape that if you're following the pattern and you're doing the decreases should make on your actual knit. So I'm playing around with this for a little bit to make sure it looks nice. Once I'm pleased with the way the shaping looks on this schematic drawing, I am going to go ahead and save it so I don't lose any of the work I've done so far. And now that we've drawn our hand, we can start on the thumb. Now, I'm using the Bezier tool again, and like the hand, with the thumb, I draw the length of the thumb, and then I kind of make a triangle shape at the top of the thumb that I can then, after I've finished the complete drawing of the thumb shape, I can go back and give that more smooth, decreased shape to the top of the thumb and not this sharp triangle shape, which isn't very accurate of what it would look like when you knit the pattern. So I've just drawn the thumb shape, and then I take that Edit Pass by Nodes tool again, as I did for the hand, and I start playing around again with getting a thumb shape that is nice and smooth and also symmetrical, because that's really important. And it takes me, again, this sometimes takes a few minutes. As you practice, you'll get better at what looks right and how to adjust things. Just play around with it until it is the shape and appearance that you're looking for the knitting pattern you're drawing a schematic for. Even though I am drawing a mitten here, the same tools, same principles, same ways we're changing, making curves out of lines is you would use on other knitting pattern schematics. So if you're doing a sweater and maybe you're making a curved crew neckline, you can use the Edit Pass by Nodes to create a smooth neckline. There's just this, I want to show you the tools, and then you can turn around on whatever schematic you're drawing and use them to create a schematic for the knitting pattern that you have to draw for. Finally, I get to a thumb shape that I am happy with, and I am going to go ahead and click that Edit Pass by Nodes again, and you can see here I'm dragging up that line I had made earlier on the hand. And the reason I'm doing that is I do not like that line crossing over the thumb opening, so I'm going to come back and use my Bezier tool to redraw another line for that beginning part of the hand before the thumb gusset begins. And I just think that looks a lot cleaner than having the line of the hand going all the way down from the top and, cutting off the thumb gusset. So that is what I just did there. Now we are going to grab our Bezier tool again, and I am starting to draw the lines that I'm going to use to mark the measurements on my schematic. So for this mitten pattern, I am going to be drawing a line to mark the length of the hand. Now that doesn't include the cuff, so I'm going to have measurements on the schematic for the hand length and then the cuff length separately. So you can see here now I am drawing the cuff length measurement that I am going to be adding a little bit later on. Then I'm going to draw a line that's going to mark the full length of the mitten. So that would be the hand and the cuff length together. Again, depending on what measurements you're marking, it might be different for your schematic, but the same tools and principles apply. I'm marking the thumb length now with the Bezier tool and creating a straight line. And now I'm going to grab on the left side of the screen. It just looks like a circle, and this tool allows you to create circles and ellipses. And I am going to create an ellipse to mark my circumference measurements that I'm going to be adding. So you can see here I marked for the cuff circumference, which I'm including on this schematic. I just marked for where I'm going to put the hand circumference. And as you can see, once you draw these lines and ellipses and stuff, you can use that arrow to move them around. And now I'm drawing the thumb circumference. So drawing that, and I'm going to go up and rotate this ellipse so I can, as you can see, the thumb's kind of on an angle. So what I do is I double click the ellipse that I've drawn after I've finished drawing it with circle. I click the arrow and I double click, and that allows me to grab and turn the ellipse I just drew. I'm going to quick save my document so I don't lose the changes I made. And now I'm going into the stroke style area, and I am adding endpoints to the lines that I made, which I'm going to be adding my finished measurements to for my schematic. I am also not only just adding the endpoints, but I am making those lines wider, so that they are clear, visibly to read and to look at. So I changed those so that they are more pronounced, and by making them wider, and I'm putting these endpoints on. Correct locations on the schematic. So that is what I am doing. I'm making sure that I pick the right text, as I inconveniently didn't have them on default. I wanted to make sure that we had all the correct matching text on each measurement throughout. And so when I'm adding text, one, I like to have my finished measurements in a document where I'm less likely to add incorrect measurements or have to figure them out while I'm drawing. I copy and paste them into the correct locations. I can use that arrow to help me move them around. They go into text. I pick a easy to read font. For me, it's usually a sans serif font. I make sure also that these texts are, because the text in Inkscape is actually they are strokes, that you go into the stroke style, stroke paint, stroke color section and make sure that it is a full saturated black, that it is filled, and that there is a width on these strokes that create the text that is not too wide. You can see here I'm making sure I have the fill on. I'm making sure I don't have too wide a stroke set for the text, because if you set too wide a stroke for the text, it will look very bold and it will be very difficult for someone to read. I made this mistake in a schematic drawing once before that I thankfully went back and corrected, but it was a learning experience and I wanted to share that with you. So now that we have a finished schematic, let's export it and put it in our pattern. So I've clicked on the File menu, Export, and you'll see there's this button that shows up that says Export. Just make sure it's saving as an SVG file so that when you insert it, like I am right now, into my knitting pattern, or right now it's a blank pattern, but this is a document like your knitting pattern will be, and insert it, make sure it's SVG filed, because that will keep it from changing proportions as you play around with fitting it in your pattern. So that is it. That is a start to finish schematic drawing, from preparing your document to saving it, to putting grids on it, to drawing the outline, the shape of your knitting pattern, to adding the measurement lines and ellipses and whatever you're going to use to mark where your measurements go, adding the measurements, and then cleaning it up, exporting it, and putting it into a document, which will be your knitting pattern. I hope that this was helpful. Please leave comments below if you have any questions. I know I can go into much more detail, and I can do even more videos on schematic drawings if you want to see things like sweaters and hats and different knitted items. But I hope this was helpful to you. Y'all have a lovely day.